All right, good evening, guys. Ken at Tortoise Capital. This is our first podcast back since open heart surgery a week ago. Luis asked me if I felt like sharing, could I explain my reasoning for the fasting process? So that's really part of the sniper trade of the day. So we'll just take a look at this. Was U.S. Steel. And the main message on this one is that sometimes it feels better to be lucky than good, but let's not have that as our primary plan. Let's still remember that the more that you plan, prepare, execute, and assess, the luckier you're going to become. And that was sort of the case here today with U.S. Steel and Cliff Natural Resources. So this is our 30-minute charts. And the 7th was a Monday. So that's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then back to Monday. So, right. So this was the Friday, the 4th. So that was my day for pre-op, and that's when I had my last meal prior to the surgery. And so I've been following a intermittent fasting and 1 meal a day protocol for about 5 years, combined with a keto diet. And in that time, I went from 275 pounds to about 220. I got as low as 200, but when I went in for the pre-op, on the pre-op day, it had crept up to about 235. And so I had gone from about a maintenance weight of 210 to 235 in the 3 weeks leading up to the mild heart attack that I suffered. So one of the reasons was the valve was getting rapidly worse, and so my heart is pushing it out through the aorta, and I had about a 60% restriction. So meaning the heart was working really hard in here, but only 40% of the blood was getting to the rest of the body and then returned. So there was no other blockages and no other issues with the heart. Very strong heart function and no damage from the mild heart attack. It was at the end of a two-hour practice session with the kids on the last day of soccer camp. I've been doing some scrimmaging in here, and that extra bit of exertion on a hot day was just too much, and that had a slight collapse. Well, the decrease in effectiveness of the valve meant I was less active, wasn't burning as much fuel, and so that was part of the reason that I had put on about 25 extra pounds. So we had the heart attack event on Monday, and then Friday I went back in for the pre-op. And so there's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday morning there's successful open heart surgery right there at about 5 a.m. And the procedure lasted about 4 hours. And so I spent the rest of Monday, all of Tuesday, and half of... oh, no, actually, I'm sorry. I only spent, the rest of Monday and then all of Tuesday in the ICU. And then Tuesday night, they moved me to the recovery for cardiac recovery. And then I spent Wednesday and Thursday in the regular recovery. You know, they took the chest tube out here, and that hurt like a son of a gun. They took the respirator out here. Then and then around, you know, they gave me final checkups here on Thursday afternoon and evening. And then I came home around noon, which is right about here. And because I do routine things routinely, I was looking at U.S. Steel, which had fallen from 25 down to 22, which is minus 15%. And that looked pretty stable, so I put a position on just to get back on the horse. So the question was about the reasoning for the fasting process. So I had a long-term experience with that, and I also I wanted to be as well prepared for the open heart surgery here on Monday morning as I could be. And so I did essentially a 3-day fast, water only and electrolytes. And I had already taken off about 15 pounds, so I was down to about 220 on the day of surgery. And what I wanted to have was, at 72 hours into your fast, you enter a state called autophagy, in which your cells recognize that you have not been eating much, and what they do is they go into all of your cells, go in and they clean up all the little broken pieces and parts of the body, and then they use that as fuel. And it actually strengthens your immune system, reduces stress on the body, increases the production of human growth hormone, and has a bunch of other things. That was discovered in Japan about, I want to say, 20 or 30 years ago, and won a Nobel Prize for the effect of longer-term fasting on body processes. So the idea of the fast up to the heart surgery was to reduce weight, improve immune system, and add human growth hormone, and basically cellular level repair. And I also didn't want to have, in this period of time here leading up to the surgery, since I was already working with a bad valve, I didn't want to have extra work with a lot of food on board and all that stuff going on. So that was the primary idea behind the fasting process. And then after the heart surgery, you know, I wanted the heart to recover and rest, and I was down to about I was probably down to about 215 or 217, right about here. And so I still had plenty of, you know, resources on board. But what this is doing is burning fat that is stored in the liver into the production of ketones. So there's two ways that you can fuel your body processes. The first one is glucose, which is metabolizing sugar from food. And the second one is ketones, in which you have stored fat in the liver and in the body, and then it converts that to ketones. And then what you do is, when you look at as the fast lengthens, the amount of energy you're getting from glucose versus from ketones has an inverse effect. So the longer you fast, the more you're burning fat, and that's only good for the body, right? So that was the reason to do the fast 3 days out from the surgery. And I talked about that with my surgeon, the guy's amazing. And the cardiologist is very good too. So that was kind of on the physical part. And I want to talk about, so I maintained the the fast all the way to here till about 2 p.m. I had a new nursing crew in there, and they were starting to get nervous because I wasn't taking food, and they said, "What's going on?" And I tried to tell them, "Hey, I'm not hungry," but at the same time, it also felt like all my numbers had stabilized really well, and we wanted to do a functions check on eating and digesting and make sure all the plumbing was still working. So it made sense to start adding like chicken broth and sherbet, and the chicken broth was bone broth was just amazing. Because it was piping hot, and I could feel that go in and start loosening up all of the phlegm and whatnot inside the lungs. So what happens is, your lungs are looking like this, these bags of air, but it's like you got this metal strap around you that just hurts like a son of a gun because they have to break your sternum to get in there. So you end up breathing very shallowly, and now you're only using the upper portion of your lungs. And so what you have to do is get back and get active, do deep breathing exercises with forced overpressure and resistance breathing so that you can start fighting against the pain of breathing, and you have to kind of fight through that so that you can start expanding the lungs and get some of your function back, because if you don't, you run the risk of some pneumonia and whatnot there. So I started eating once more right around 2 p.m., right about here. I got down about as low as 213 that morning, so I had lost basically 22 pounds from the 235 that I had prior to the surgery. So I had dropped about 22 pounds, and right now I'm back to about 218, and I'm eating, because now what I want to do is I got to bring new materials in here, because now we're trying to repair bodily functions. And if you don't have all of the minerals and whatnot, it'll start depleting your body to repair the things that need to be repaired. So it made sense to resume a normal monitored diet at this point. The next thing that I would say is that from the time of pre-op all the way to Friday morning until about 2:30 in the morning, that was about a 7-day process featuring the the fasting and all that stuff. And so what I decided to do was to conduct a true storytelling process in which I was going to create artifacts and document my experiences and feelings so that I could just, testify to what's going on as part of the way we do true storytelling. I also wanted to do a modified form of vision quest, guided by the wisdom of my friend Mike Three Bears, who is a Lakota Sioux medicine man, a former oil executive and engineer, who then retired instead of going to senior leadership so that he could go back to the reservation excuse me, and teach science, technology, engineering, and math subjects. And what he does now is kind of roams the Southwest doing vision quests and sweat lodge ceremonies and things like that. So we'd been talking about the principles of that for 3 or 4 years. And I met him through a true story circle with my mentor, David Boji. And so I've been working with Mike, and he gave me the words a couple years ago to work on, which was the surrender, empty, and then nothing. And it took me about 2.5 years to work through all of that, what that meant. And then when I, kind of debriefed him on what I thought it all meant, I said, okay, now you're ready for the next word, which is love. And so the Vision Quest was a way I started to structure this intentional reflection process where I was going to go through and I was going to create a spirit circle, and then have a picture in my mind of a giant tableau or a mural that would have features and it would have spaces and places to put all of the things that were going to come out of this internal process I had. And so the surrender says something like this, that if you're just kind of walking along in your little spirit walking man, and you're surrounded by these other things in your immediate environment that have direct and then maybe further out indirect effects, X's and Y's, things that you're thinking about, but they kind of are external to you. It's sort of where the illusion of control is. So you have like you got this sense of the irreducible self, the autonomous individual, the ego in there. And in the surrender portion, my process was to take these indirect and direct things that were on influence on me and just surrender to the fact that they were not me, that was part of the external environment. So that required the 3 A's: awareness of the thing being out there, acknowledgement of how you see it in your life and what it means to you. And you just say, well, I don't know that I know exactly what it is, but I do know how I'm responding to it and how it's affecting me or how I'm reacting to it. So I'm just going to acknowledge that things are exactly the way they are. So it's sort of it's a trust in your own awareness and of your own process of making sense. And then finally, an acceptance that you've done what you're supposed to do, and now you've identified all of these external things that are part of you. So that's what the surrender portion of surrender, empty, and nothing leads to. Now the next step is to go through a empty process. And so now what I've done is inside my circle and myself, I've sort of cleared the deck of all those externals that I've surrendered to and said, you know what, everything outside sort of the reach of my arms, that's the universe's job to handle that stuff. So, you surrender that to spirit. And then that now allows you to kind of go inside the self to see what are the things that are on the inside that are in there, bubbling along and part of your manifest. And so that takes a visual form of a big bowl filled with stuff. And so now what I do is I start extracting these coherent, think of them as story stones is how I do it. I take it out, there's a thing, and it has attachments to my inside, and it's people, places, events, and memories, and sense-making. And I realize that in the same way that the external world, those internal stories that have been constructed, I actually do have something to do with how those are constructed and how I take them. So it's another to be aware of. It's the same 3 again: awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance. So as I start pulling things out of this, I can now take a look at each little story stone, as a gemstone or a facet, And I take a look, I think of it as a precious jewel. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the, for each one of those, I'm going to use a Nikan process. Now, Nikan is a Japanese self-management process, which is very much like Zen for practical people. Zen sometimes in the warrior tradition can be a little esoteric. You know, I am the sword is me, we are one, and all that stuff. In the Nikan philosophy, which has been around, I guess, 100 years, more or less, you ask 3 questions. It is focused on relationships, and it is typically with people. Now, because a lot of the things that I was unpacking were stories and had other, you know, natural forces in there, I expanded it to whatever felt like a really important, powerful story in my life. I would bring out and then sort of inspect it and walk around it and see what was going on. So the 3 questions are, from this person, what have they given you that supported you? What have you given to their life? And then what problems have you caused that person? Now, the 4th question, which would be, what problems have they given you, is not addressed in Nikan, because the experience is that we spend most of our time thinking about what other people have done to screw us over or whatever. So we're probably really pretty aware of it. Plus, if we're putting responsibility onto them for our condition, then it makes more sense that this is pretty well known. So you work on those 3 things. So now my process with this mural was to take my bowl, empty it 1 story stone at a time, fully consider it in the round, almost like in the way protreptic you walk around and ask questions, until you get a deeper understanding. You look inside that story through each of these different facets. So I can look at it. So if a story is like a gemstone with all these different cuts on it, there's some inner nature to it. And as you look through these different facets, you get a different picture of the inside of the stone. And when you're done doing that, you come out of it with a deeper understanding. And what you're doing is you're doing the awareness, acknowledgement, and acceptance of, that's what that story stone has been for me up until this point. So when I'm done considering it, I now come over to the mural conceptually and place that thing on the storyboard with a connection to now what it means to me sitting in my little story circle. So it's like I think of it as an inventory process. And then you go back into the bowl and you get another one, and so you start populating this. And I took the position that I was going to trust my inner guide to nominate what the next thing to think about was and for how long I should think about it. You know, because this whole time I'm contending with, you know, getting tests and drawing blood and doing all that stuff. So there were, so I had no phones, no email, no TV, no radio, no reading, nothing. It was just me and this sort of semi-documented life. And so, you know, I would find, hey, I had this idea from my past, and I temporarily placed it on the story mural, and then would go on to other lips. So I was just going through episodes, and I looked at, in terms of people, events, feelings, and it was semi-structured in the sense that I would spend as much time on it as I could until it felt like that little part was done. And then maybe I might go think about something else and something else. But I was making inventory. In between those sessions, I was also, as I would think of one of these things, I would say, oh yeah, that person, I haven't thought about them for a long while. And so you start making these lists of the people, events, and the feelings that you intend to process. And so you're not done until you've emptied that bowl, considered all those things, and then put them on the mural. And now you're starting to draw connections not only from yourself to these events, but now you're also drawing connections. And because of the Nican process, you're thinking about what you give people, what they give you, and all the problems you've caused them. You're starting not only to consider the individual story sets, but also the influences that create this large mural. And so what I felt very strongly in this process was, I was excavating, deeper and deeper, and layers, like going down through a mine, and because the mural is as large as it needs to be, you have all the space you need to really place things clearly, establish those connections to you and your little story circle, and then sometimes you stop and think about it. What is the other work that I need to know? Some of the things that came unbidden to me was I constructed a visual mental theater that I was working on. It was I very much felt like I was in the audience of my own storytelling, and then up on this stage with all the backdrop and all that other stuff. There was a real sense of participation, and I was looking to see, characters that would come in and announce themselves. And so very early, the spirit animal of the badger came to me that I strongly identify with. And, processed through that. The Wolverine made a brief and mysterious visit. And the idea was something like the badger is sort of content in this little space and is very protective and defensive and guards his lair. And his cousin, the Wolverine, is this thing that traverses wide distances and spaces and is hard to find and never shows up when you expect. And so there was like, the Wolverine would come and I would experience some of the hints of things to come and places that I had been and things like that, maybe the deeper spiritual meaning of things. The coyote came for me and kind of gave me a warning about the threat to the badger, which is the rattlesnake. And so I had to spend time on understanding, what the rattlesnake means to me and a badger. If you're a badger in a lair and you're face to face with the rattlesnake gets a bite at you. And can you handle that? Or can you kill the rattlesnake coming into your lair? Now, rattlesnakes aren't interested in eating badgers, except baby badgers they might. So there is a certain tension between the existential fears and threats of another member of the sacred animal kingdom. And so the coyote appeared with an idea about, hey, just be aware that there are rattlesnakes out there. And I also recognize, the coyote will come in and steal your kids too, to feed their kids. So those four spirit animals made an appearance when it was time for them to just show up. And then that just became another, sort of set of stories and whatnot on my process. And then sometimes I was thinking about, the next story to place on there. Other times I was thinking about the relationships, standing back, walking around it and seeing what was going on. And just sort of carefully unpacking and, getting accountability over things. And so that whole process went around and around and around. I probably thought about 200 or 300 different people and, major life events and stuff like that. And when I was done with that, I was very satisfied that I had done that work, that I had done the surrender, emptiness, and nothing, or the surrender and the emptiness. So now I have surrender, empty, and nothing. The Nikon process got me through, the systematic assessment of relationships. And then at some point your bowl has been emptied sufficiently, you know. And the idea of nothing is that once you've done that, an empty bowl inside your story circle with your accountability map and deeper understanding, there's nothing else that you have to do. That you are totally free to do whatever, to do or not do whatever it is you think needs to be done, and that what you think needs to be done comes from a deep source of purpose and values and identity and intention. And that's where Mike Three Bear's guidance to me was so important, the surrender, empty, nothing. And then the next word to add was love. So whatever action to take from this situation was to go to do it with an intention of love, for yourself, for the universe, for the people and forces inside it. And so that was very sustained. Now, what was very interesting to me was from the time we made the decision on, I had the event on a Monday. On Tuesday, I had been evacuated to, meet my cardiologist, and made a decision that we were going to do this thing as soon as possible. And it turned out, hey, we were able to do a pre-op on Friday and the surgery on Monday, so there wasn't a lot of screwing around time. But really, because I'd been working on this thing sort of for a while, it felt like that was the correct thing to do, focusing on starting with the Friday morning fast. And so there was a sense of serenity and no fear or anxiety or worry or any of that stuff at any point in this whole process. To be honest, there were some dark moments late Monday night, and when they took the breathing tube out, and I came out of full anesthesia and felt I was drowning on the table because I got this giant snake going down my throat. Maybe that's where the rattlesnake came from, I don't know. But there were some dark moments of some suffering and whatnot. But that got resolved. It was suffering, not really fear. And so with the intention of love going forward, I was able to kind of just keep working my way through this, probably 18 hours a day, because I was not sleeping for extended periods because they were coming in to draw blood and all that stuff a lot. So I then sort of woke up at 2:30 Friday, absolute clarity and a sense of completeness that I had done the work I was supposed to do. And then from about 2:30 until 6:30, I spent time crafting with love my intention, for the business and for life and what I was going to do going forward. With this new, deeper understanding of where I was and who I was and all that stuff from the story circle, and looking at that vast mural with all the elements of living stories. There's people with live stories in there that are connected to me. There are artifacts from other lives that are parts and parcel of this thing. So you have a mix of dynamic and static elements of storytelling inside this, and this whole thing is on a train and moving through time. So there's that sense. And so then from 2:30 to 6:30, I ended up just spending time on what it was I intended to do with our business and whatnot. And it became very clear to me that I was really satisfied through all this that we'd gotten the book completed, book one. So that book has a bunch of chapters. Each chapter in that book is really the entry to another whole book. Like book number 2 is going to be about tools and indicators and whatnot that are in our toolkit. There's going to be some in here on the active trading process, the how to carve wood without cutting your thumb off, starting to integrate. And so that's going to lead to about another 10 books I've laid out in this sort of a volume of books. And some of them are going to be mine, and some of them are going to be the students who are building on my work, because I think I've built on Van Tharp's work, and plus a bunch of other folks that I describe in book 1. And my tribute to Van was really to do my best to write a book about how I have been applying the lessons he taught me. I felt that was the best way to respect him. And after the work I just did, I'm even more convinced of that. And so we designed book number 1 to include guys like my brother and Phil and Griff to have their own chapters, so that they can then take their chapter and turn it into a book for their work, so that we maintain this idea of each one teach one and build accountability maps of where our ideas come from and what it is that we have done as a way really just to document our practice. You know, there are a million ways to trade. Here's the way we do it, and this is what we've done and how we learned, and you'll see that in book 1. I also realized that there were about 3 more workshops that I got to do. One of them is to go through strictly each book as we write them. It needs to be a home study course, which has the ability to be good, better, or best, where we have a home study, we have a hybrid, like we're doing now with the creativity and the foundations, and then one where I might do like some kind of special coaching or something like that. So that's sort of the each book leads to a course. The courses give choices. The results of the trading we do continue to go into documents. Those documents continue to produce artifacts that become materials for new books, new and deeper understandings. And so all that is sort of fitting out real well. And then the courses that we'll have include some of mine that are like, foundations and creativity and the things that I teach, but also courses that students of mine have put together that I've sort of helped them develop and certify their process and done our community best to keep track of that. And then that starts building out, and then their students will end up being able to expand. So I see that as a way to start building, this network of mutually reinforcing and fully supportive learning environment in the OWL group, which allows us to leverage a community of practice that is true to the values of true storytelling and ethical living. True storytelling. Sorry. I got a new pen pad. I'm still learning to calibrate it. So everybody that is sort of like accepted into the, to the production area of this are people that are familiar with true storytelling and each one teach one and the community of practice. And you can see that easily with Bill Scheit and Jeff Boccaccio, with my brother, with Phil and Griff. I'm twisting Luke's arm to do something on forex for us. We got Dr. Morrison, got Danny, who does programming and whatnot for us. So that from 2:30 till 6:30 that Friday morning, I spent in sort of just laying out again, in a visual template kind of manner, how we go, past, present, and future. And we'll just, plan, prepare, execute, assess, and keep this thing moving forward in a dynamic way through the infrastructure we have. Because we're going to build a 50-year solution here. So that's sort of that. Well, I say all that simply to say, by the time by 6:30, I had done all that work, and dude, I was ready to go home. And the doc came in and saw him, and he says, holy mackerel. The difference between me on Thursday night and Friday morning was really, well ahead of the normal protocols for recovery. Part of that is that my heart was strong, and what was holding me back was this bad valve and only 40% oxygen getting out. So the heart was working much harder than it had to in order so that the 40% would be enough. So now that this valve is in there and working, which is about a 15-year solution, and then easily replaced later, this is now, my energy level is actually higher than it was already before going in, my level of alertness and whatnot. Because now it's like you take the restrictor bands off of this thing, and now it's actually working hard, but now all the blood's getting out there. So that's sort of that. Well, onward. So I get home around noon, and I hadn't looked at anything on the business or any of the trading or the portfolios or anything at all in this whole period, because this was exclusively to step outside of the world of the mundane, the physical world, and inhabit the sort of the spirit world where we make sense of things, and exclusively work on all that. Because I was already satisfied and unworried about where I was at the start, and so I just sort of committed to all that. But now as I started, come back home, survive that drive home through traffic, I did a quick look like I always do in about 2 minutes through the swing portfolio, and I saw U.S. Steel. I said, well, I'll put that position on. And then this morning, now there's news announcing where they're going to end some buyout deals with Cliff Natural Resources and Nucor Steel. And so this thing, I woke up to a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's just, well, if you got 10R in hand, you might as well add a second position, a third position, consolidation, a fourth position, spasmodic, and then, so now here's that position. So this is already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's another 7. So the first one's plus 17. This one is plus 7 and 5 and 1. So that's actually 30R in 4 positions. And so if my decision is to get out here, how much to get out of here? And which says, hey, what's your plan for catastrophic success? So what you've seen here is actually going to be one of those 4 workshops where I've gone through a lot of explanations and case studies of typical trading challenges that we get to encounter on every trading journey. When you're going from story circle on a journey to your next reflection point in your story circle, and it's never a straight line. You're always kind of wondering, well, while you're making that movement, there's typical things that come up that are challenging or opportunities. So this is one of those. So what is your plan for catastrophic success? What is my process, my P, for approaching this decision in a way that is consistent with my body of trading knowledge? So that's something for you to kind of work out on there. So this is sort of the timeline, the physical processes, the spirit emotional processes. I had great conversations with these wonderful young folks that were giving me the best possible care that you could imagine. And they were, a couple of them just confided in me, they were astonished at how serene and calm I was and kind of lighthearted. But part of that is because when you go through this process, you learn to distinguish between you and all the externalities. So I attributed a lot to that. And had some good conversations with the surgeon, who's an amazing young man. which I may talk about later. But anyway, that's sort of the sniper trade of the day for U.S. Steel, and that's the short answer to your question, Luis. I'm going to produce that process that I just spent an hour describing as one of the 4 workshops, because I realized I needed to actually do that, because that was very much designed and constructed and framed, if you will, on the way. Because what it did was it took true storytelling and the Nikan philosophy for examining relationships and the vision quest of the Lakota Sioux, and it created this sort of integrating space where each one of those features or each one of those processes was contributing to my inner work in a very harmonious kind of way, which is actually what you see when we look at the Foundations course and the Creativity 202 course, is that you have true storytelling, story science, and then trading knowledge. So it seems something like the rule of threes makes a really dynamic process in the middle here. So I'm gonna build a workshop on that talks about how to do what I did, and I'm going to give that to the folks in the creativity and the Owl Wisdom group, and offer it as a pretty low cost offering to everybody else, with the idea that the money that comes from that is going to go to support, as usual, the soccer team. So that's kind of where we are. So back to our regularly scheduled program. So here's another sniper trade of the day. So U.S. Steel was the only thing I put on Friday of note. And Cliff was one of the companies that's in the discussions with U.S. Steel. And this was the gap up in to here, and then a little sell-off, and then a resumption. Gave me a chance to get into Cliff with sort of a typical 30-minute stop. And then this one, because because you have 3R in hand, and why not? And then a standard all-out exit as a dragon exit, and no overnight risk. Another one I played today, just trying to get my legs under me. This is NVIDIA, and this is one that gave a nice orderly SSC. Here was the first 30-minute move. Actually started with a gap down and blew through the PSAR. So again, standard risk to the bottom of the dragon. Add a second position at 2R. I really liked how that closed, so I'm holding that one overnight. We've got 1, 2, 3, plus 1. So this is 4R in 2 positions, and I think that one has a chance to do some work for us tomorrow. The last one I want to share with you, and this is going to be one of those case studies in the applied hybrid trading workshop. Because I've accumulated a couple hundred quizzes and case studies, from the start of the COVID trading, that has sort of culminated in an organic way towards the development of sniper trading and hybrid. So your quiz would be this: to construct your narrative for each of these blue numbered moments. I'll get you started with number 1. So at number 1, we had a close here. This is where it closed, and then there was a huge gap down, and then a recovery, and then holding support at 2. So really 1 establishes where the stalking begins. The magnitude of the sell-off suggests that there can be some room. Well, when you get a sell-off that big, you get a move like this. You get a sell-off that big, it moves this far. You get a sell-off this big, it moves that big. It sells off this far, it moves like that. So how far is it going to go from here? I don't know, but it's always had buying interest, and so I'm not surprised if this were to continue. And it's Tesla, and it's trading down around 238, 239 by the time we get an entry. And then the intraday process looks something like this. Gap down recovery just short of the dragon, comes down now, gives you a kata 2, cannot penetrate the dragon, pulls down, does not violate support level at 2. So that's what 3 means. 3 was the opportunity for it to fail, but it didn't. And 4 is where it takes out the emerging dragon. So this is a kata 2. So even though this is the last half hour, I'm mindful that there could be something like U.S. Steel happen to this tomorrow, and I'm willing to take some of that U.S. Steel money and put it in here with a sort of a standard risk. Well, there's 5 and 6 and 7 are these two, and here's 8. So I've told you what 1, 2, 3, and 4 are. You probably want to write that in your own words, and then develop your understanding for 5, 6, 7, and 8. And we can check answers on that tomorrow. So that's one where I don't have money in hand, but I'm willing to take that position at that time of day for that symbol based on where we are in the market, and that's kind of that. Yeah, that's the that was the U.S. Steel discussion. Well, I'm going to take a quick look at where we are in the modified plan. You guys have been very patient. So this is the modified tactical plan. It gets rid of some of the trivia. There's that sniper trade of the day I've already talked you through. Now I'm noticing on the 150, so this is the 150-day look back, I'm seeing the 10-day low, 30-day low, and so this has a feeling of a kata 2. If this can hold right here, and the R10 just reversed today and closed at the top of the daily range, that could be the buffer tomorrow that allows this thing to get to the 5-day high, PSAR flip, top of the dragon, top of the RL10, 150-day high, and now suddenly this thing is off to the races. And then it looks like this, 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 and then just orderly sell-offs. Maybe that sell-off, this sell-off here is a little larger than these two sell-offs, but there's more gains to be at risk, so maybe guys were willing to get out. So when you're approaching the top of that long-term resistance, this is still an orderly move, but this is setting up very nicely for a Z3 breakout in either direction. We'll see that again now on the, here's the 30-day look back. So now we can see, kind of see clearly here, that we definitely have had a harsh winter. We're well below the Red River. We've sold off from 459 down to 444, which is 15. That's a minus 4%. And today the R10 reversed. It opened at the low and closed at the high. This was all signal today. And there's still rooms for it to get to the crossing the dragon, PSAR flip, top of the dragon, top of the RL10, and so forth. So there's this little price ladder of things going to the upside until it gets beyond here when everything is free and clear. So this I see as the tactical space, meaning that we got to be finding 2-to-1 reward to risk ratios or better just inside these little spaces, that it's not really a runaway and breathing a sigh of relief until it gets out there. And now here's on the 30-minute chart for the S&P. You can see that this thing had some low moments in the PSAR flip, and it closed really well at the top. And that's that first stage it's got to get above. That's a pretty important, at 450 seems to be pretty important. And then there's your 5-day high. But this is the statistically significant target. So if you get above, if you see above 450, up we go. The usual suspects, I'm not going to read through that. I would just notice that there is quite a distinction between the things that got murdered today and the things that actually did pretty well, like the Dow, Mexico, regional banks, lithium. So, whereas you have a lot of things that were punished during the sell-off. So this is a differentiating market. This is not everything going down together. There are things that are going up at this time. Some auto framer work, lots of goodies on there. I'm not going to read through that. The squeezes, plenty of squeezes, including number one, excuse me, Microsoft. And it's at 3.5 to 1 on the auto framer. This is that swing portfolio and its auto framer, and you'll see what I've done on this is sorted it by the reward to risk ratio. So there's IP. I like AI right now because it's had a big sell-off, and it's got a great reward to risk ratio, and had, you know, one of the best performances once you exclude U.S. Steel and Cliff. So you can see that is restricted to steel because Alcoa was not part of that metals move today. NVIDIA is still in play. That's why I was willing to hold that. Intel, NVIDIA, all of that's looking pretty good. So that's how I read all that. This really shows the differences in the haves and the have-nots too. As you see, there's a whole cluster of things that have been slaughtered, but real strong pockets of the Qs, tech, the S&P, staples and metals and mining, and healthcare. And here's U.S. Steel. You're not going to see that number all that long. 1880 ought to tell you what that 2-day move is like. And, you know, new core steel, pretty big day. Cliff, really big day. So some interesting things going on there. Starting to run out of gas a little bit, but it's sort of... I got to do breathing exercises anyway, and talking is certainly an exercise for me. This was from Jose. He was asking questions about, the SSC entry. I don't really look at this one as an SSC because the move from up here down to here, that's not a harsh winter. I mean, we are still... make that a yellow line so you can see that. This is not... This was a strong upward move. That is not yet a harsh winter. But it is kind of a kata too, so I don't mind that with a wrist box here. In the chat room, I gave you a link to one of the Foundations course Q&As that spent a lot of time talking about once you get the move off the bottom and this thing starts going through, the drag, through the dragon. You have that fat dragon right there. And you have a PSAR that's coming down here. And the discussion in that video link I gave you was, where inside this process do you make the entry? So I'm not going to give you that lesson again. Now, Greg, you might be interested in this. One of the things that is going to create one of those new workshops is to go back through the last about 50 hours of the Foundations Q&A. Each one of those is an hour to 2 hours of densely packed material. And what we got to do is we got to unpack those so that we can get a note sheet for each session and break that into itemized list of indexes so that we can find a 5 to 7 minute solution instead of making guys search all the way through that. So if you're interested in that as an intern, that is some of the best possible work that you can do. That's really how Griff and Phil and Bill and Jeff got started in their process of constructing their own systems and developing their own courses in confidence, is that kind of getting down into the weeds. I think that would be a very enlightening project for you. So, let's see. Oh, whoops, here was the second one on Tesla. Yeah, this is one where he was talking about the RL10 reverses down here. So make that a bright yellow so that you can actually see what's going on, because this is what your RL10 looks like. So that's, I would say, yeah, that's not a harsh winter again. It's really a kata 2. And so now the question is, once this thing has reversed and the RL10 doesn't cross to here, this, you'll see in that other video we talk about using a look back of about 2 PSAR dots. So when this thing comes through the dragon in this bar, I go back to 2 and just draw this line right here, -2. And so I'm ready to buy price breaking out right here instead of waiting for the bar to close and then the RL10 coming through the dragon and hitting the PSAR so that I can get this move here. That's what that is contained in that video. It's really important in the SSC to get that one right. This looks like this, yeah, micro win for Brian, and getting the measured move that he can. Yeah, so here's another one of those where the move from the peak to the valley. This is not a harsh winter, so that's not an SSC. But what that means is it's a kata 2. So you can actually play the breakout of price As soon as it gets across the dragon with a standard risk box here, and if you're feeling froggy, here's a 1, 2, 3 entry, which gives you all of that move too. So just some things to think about. All right, that's everything I got for tonight. I'll get this posted, and just wanted to give you a preview of coming attractions. Appreciate you guys hanging in there, and we shall see you on down the road. Take good care.